So most people I've heard of the Confucius Institutes, they think of them as at like a college level, like universities have Confucius Institutes. But actually, how far down does this go? What have you found at the K through 12 level?
So doing a little bit of research, what we found is Confucius Institutes operate in a pretty similar fashion in the K through 12 level, where there's this partnership made with local school districts to bring in Chinese language and culture into the K through 12 space. And that kind of is the foot in the door that these institutes have gotten in K through 12. And again, now, a lot of places have severed their ties with Confucius Institutes after there were all of these reports of CCP influence and nefarious practices being used under the guise of Confucius Institutes. But we are still seeing some concerning patterns.
They're not called Confucius Institutes necessarily, though, right?
Exactly. And that's actually one of the things that makes it a little bit interesting and difficult sometimes to track and look deep to see who's behind it, because they're presenting themselves as language and culture programs.
But no longer tied to something called Confucius Institute or like any of the previous names that we knew for them.
Correct. Now, there are about, I want to say roughly a dozen, maybe a little bit less, that are Confucius Institutes still in existence under that name. But we've seen a shift away from using that name because now it has a bit of a bad reputation.
Leave it to the CCP to give Confucius a bad reputation. So what's the point of the CCP trying to get into K through 12 education?
So again, theory, hypothesis that I think is probably grounded in some of the real data that we're seeing on the ground. But the younger you start, the easier it is to convince people to go along a certain political ideology or social ideology. And there's a foothold that they can take there that any nefarious actor actually can, because public school districts are usually pretty open to language and culture programs, to receiving some sort of funding, to exchange programs, to study abroad programs. All of those things under the best circumstances are what you would want to see in K through 12.
Yeah, so, I mean, I imagine they're not, coming into these schools and just being like, Mao Zedong was the great hero of the Chinese people. Communism is great. China number one. Like, they're not coming in with that attitude exactly, or they're not teaching those things specifically, right? Because it'd be too obvious.
Well, it depends. So the ones that are under the guise of we're here and we're going to offer all of these services to you for free because we want to help and we're the good guys. No, they're not coming in saying, China's great and Mao was wonderful and yay, revolution. However, there are organizations, community organizations that are doing just that. I mean, they have it in their about pages and about sections on their websites that they want to critique empire and capitalism, and that they really do promote revolution and revolutionary struggle. We do see that. It's just not under the same name, the same title as some of the organizations that are being tied directly to, say, China or the CCP.
Well, so those things are part of the Chinese language and culture programs, or they're separate from Chinese language and culture?
Separate. They're separate.
Okay, I do want to get into that, but first, let's make sure we've got this stuff about the Confucius Institutes or their spin-offs exact. So like I'm a fifth grader or something. My elementary school offers a Mandarin language. It's funded by this outside organization. What am I going to learn that's different than what I would learn in an equivalent like Spanish or French class?
Part of it is what you're not going to learn. So you're not going to learn the history behind the Chinese Revolution and the Communist Revolution in China. You're not going to learn about the tensions between mainland China and Taiwan. You're not going to learn real history. So what happened, it is presented kind of like a facade, like a Potemkin village. There's on the outside, everything is beautiful and painted pretty, and you're not going to learn about like the rusty history behind the pretty paint. So things are presented we should have cultural exchange. China's a partner. They have 1 billion people. The Chinese language is super important because when we talk about in the future doing business and doing more education, study abroad, a country with 1 billion people, of course you want to have great ties. So there is a lot that is presented that is really focused on the importance of strong relations and ties between the American people and the Chinese people. And then there's something that ignores the reality of the Chinese Communist Party governing structure, and not just the threats that may pose to us in the United States, but the threats that they pose to the Chinese people themselves.
Okay, so it's basically kind of like whitewashing what the CCP has been, like what the CCP is, and it's really just about like, let's be friends, let's do business together, maybe.
Exactly.
Is it hard to, but like, I guess if you came in not knowing anything about China, right? And you're like, oh yeah, I want my kid to learn Chinese because obviously, Chinese, Mandarin's the language of the future. There's 1.4 billion people. What's wrong with, being friends and all this stuff? Like, what is the problem with this?
I don't think that there's a problem with learning the language per se. To me, when I look at, especially in K through 12 education and foreign influence, it's that what is being presented as free isn't really free. So if students learning another language, it's a great thing. Students learning how to communicate with maybe students that live in a foreign country, again, can be a great thing. But what's coming with that? What's attached to that money? What's attached to that program?
So what does come with these free language programs?
Well, oftentimes they're not free. A teacher has to teach from the curriculum developed by the outside organization. Some instances, the outside organization has the requirement that they're able to audit the class. So come sit in, watch how the teacher teaches, see what the kids are doing. And oftentimes also teachers have to go through training, professional development provided from the outside organization. So it's not necessarily free. That's a lot of power and influence that a school district is handing over to an outside organization that then has pretty much a direct hand into a K through 12 classroom.
So what happens if a kid raises her hand and says, I heard about this thing that happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989. What's going to be the response to that?
That's a great question. That is a great question. We're not sure. But my guess would be that if this is a CCP paid program and a CCP paid organization is auditing the class, they're not going to want a teacher to give an accurate answer to that question.
Yeah, it reminds me of something. And when I took Mandarin in college, it was not tied to a CCP program, but we did have a student teacher from mainland China who was doing like a seminar, and was about 15 of us, and one of the students was showing a slideshow of this like Chinese or Asian fair that she went to, and giving a presentation about it in Chinese. And the teacher was like really happy, all the food and different things. And then the next slide was like this booth of people doing Falun Gong, and the teacher's face went like ashen white, and she was like, I could tell she was like freaked out because she didn't know how to handle it. And she didn't want to say, like, she kind of didn't want to say anything because obviously, and this was at the time when it was like the height of the anti-Falun Gong propaganda from the CCP. So I just realized like, oh, like she's probably freaked out, not because of Falun Gong itself, but because she's scared that if she says anything, it might be the wrong thing, and then someone might report her for saying, saying either Falun Gong is like saying something bad from the perspective of the CCP, or from the university that would be mad at her for like censoring free speech. So she actually would be caught between those two things.
Did anyone else notice that in your class?
I don't know. I noticed it, and I was kind of like I didn't want to like laugh because it was really uncomfortable for everyone, but I knew what was going on. Maybe some others did too.
And that raises another point: okay, are there situations where a foreign government is paying for some of these language and culture programs, and maybe what's tied to that money is that they're sending a teacher over to teach it? And then what happens there? And I think that you bring up a really good point, because we've seen this, this has been reported in media, where you have Chinese international students studying here in the United States, and they're kind of walking on eggshells because there are other Chinese foreign national students studying, and they don't know if their behavior is going to be reported back to the CCP.
Yeah, no, that would be terrifying. And like, even for those students who do want to sort of experience freedom in American culture,
Right.
they're always like, but am I being watched? And that was just one clip from our hour-long interview with Brandy Shufutinsky. We're going to have a lot more on our website, ChinaUncensored.tv, where you can get full episodes of the podcast. Also, you have an app that you can watch things on. You get live streams, a community chat with us, and a ton of other cool stuff. So check out the full version of this podcast and a lot of other stuff on ChinaUncensored.tv.